So, hello, Derrick,
Hello, Lucas.
and
Good morning
welcome.
or evening, I suppose. It's still technically morning for me here in the U.S. in Portland, Oregon. I'm on the Pacific Coast, and you're in the Netherlands, right?
Yes, yes, near Amsterdam. Yes.
Yeah.
It's always a bit strange with these time differences. Yeah. Um, so we've spent a while, trying to trying to get to get a right moment for an interview. But finally, we both managed to find a time. So I'm really
Yes,
glad
and
to. I'm really happy to be talking with you because for me, you're one of the heavyweights in tango, so to
oh,
say.
well, thank
Um,
you.
and I've been looking forward very much to hearing your story, so to say. So that's what I want to explore today. And yeah, first of all, can you give me a short, like for the people who don't know you, which is not very likely, but there are always people who don't know you, I guess. Can you give us a short introduction of who you are, like a summary or something?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Derrick del Pilar. I have been dancing tango now for 15 years, since 2006 in Buenos Aires. I'm American, a native of the U.S., but my father, his parents were Filipino. They actually came to the U.S. after World War II. The reason I speak Spanish is actually because my grandmother was a Spanish teacher in the Philippines. So she came from a family that was a little higher on the socioeconomic ladder. She was actually quite educated for a Filipino woman of that generation. She taught Spanish at a Catholic school when she came over to the US. And she taught me a lot of Spanish when I was very young. Um, but it wasn't exactly like a heritage speaker situation either. So I spoke her weird like Filipino textbook Spanish a lot. Um, and I really, I sort of got into tango in when I was an undergraduate in college because I took a class with a professor, Dr. Melissa Fitch, who studies Latin American popular culture. I was attending the University of Arizona at that time. And one of the things she studied is tango, the representations of tango in the media, all kinds of Latin dance things too. But tango really kind of stuck with me. And then as an undergraduate, when I was wanting to do a study abroad and live outside the U.S., the place I picked was Buenos Aires because of this professor, Dr. Fitch, and how much she talked up being in Argentina and how much she loved it and loved tango. And so that's how I ended up at 19 years old living by myself in Buenos Aires, and that's where and how I started tango actually.
So before we dive further into that, can you maybe like give a short summary of like what like a very short summary of what you've been doing with tango, like not only in the beginnings, but what you're known for, so to say.
Yeah, of course, the reason that Lucas has asked me here is because I'm known for my blog Poesía de Gotan, where I post English translations of tango lyrics for people to read so that they can understand a little bit more about tango culture. I also DJ a lot at festivals around the US. Of course, that's been on hiatus for the last couple of years for reasons we're all too intimately familiar with. But yeah, so I DJ, and occasionally I've given lectures as well on tango lyrics, a little bit about the history, focusing on different poets and things like that um, at festivals here in the US, mostly on the West Coast, like in San Francisco and here in Portland.
Okay, so returning to this origin story, so to say, was this these lectures were they the first yeah point in your life where you got familiar with, like, was it like a sudden way of getting to know what tango was, or had you ever heard of tango, so to say, in other words?
I had, well, actually, so not really. In when I was in high school, one of my friends did, this kind of, she was very into ballroom dancing. And she took all these ballroom dance lessons, where they did the only tango that I was familiar with was like that international ballroom tango, the very stylized, very different than the Argentine tango we all know and love. And it was not something that I was really particularly interested in, this very regimented world of ballroom dancing and learning patterns and dancing with a number on your back and all of that stuff. To the very like weird tinny ballroom dance music that they use in all these studios. Um, and then when I was in this class with this professor, Dr. Fitch, one of the things we looked at is how tango is used in a lot of like movies, films, Hollywood as like this like very stylized, stereotypical representation with the rose in the mouth, the red dress, very sexy, a lot of dancing that has nothing to do with how people dance in Argentina. But what we did in the class that was really interesting was we sort of unpacked that and then compared what people use, what tango is represented as versus the reality of the social dance and where it came from in Argentina. And that fascinated me. And that was one of the reasons why when I went to Argentina, of course, I decided, well, I have to take some tango lessons while I'm here. So that was, yeah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
And it was just, it was really interesting to me, really fascinating, because, you know, the whole social aspect of social dance is not something that, of course, most of us or most people outside of tango are really familiar with. They have this idea, like I had when I was, you know, when my friend was taking those lessons, of ballroom dance and partner dance as being this very artificial, cold, clinical thing. You know, full of choreography, full of all of that, you know, when in reality, when you actually go to Argentina, when you go to Buenos Aires, and even around the world, you realize how vibrant, alive, and community-based of an activity it is, or of a dance it is, with such a rich cultural history that has, you know, very little to do with dancing with a rose in your teeth or any of these other things that we all, you know, kind of see as our first introduction to tango outside Argentina.
So, were you studying Latin America studies or something like that, or?
Yeah, so, you know, as an undergraduate, you know, I studied creative writing and Spanish literature, you know, because of course I wanted to make a lot of money. And those are very lucrative things to study. Yeah, it was, and so it was in that course, that Spanish professor that really introduced me to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, and to tango. And then after finishing my undergraduate, I did do a master's program in Latin American studies. At one point, I thought I wanted to be a professor myself, but after 2 years at the graduate level, I realized that was absolutely not what I wanted to do, and not something I wanted to devote my life to. The way academia works these days in the US, especially in the humanities, is really brutal. And it involves a lot of theorizing and not a lot of doing. So one of the things that the way I actually started my blog was when I was at the University of California in this master's program, sitting in these classes all day, having these like really arcane, you know, theoretical debates about literature, semiotics, all of these things. I was actually quite exasperated and bored with all of that. And what I ended up doing was, when I didn't want to do my schoolwork or my readings in graduate school, I would dash off a translation of a tango song that had gotten stuck in my head, because at that time I was also going out to milongas in San Francisco all the time. I had actually picked the University of California as the place I wanted to go for graduate school, because the tango community in San Francisco is one of the best and biggest in the United States, which is, of course, a great reason to pick a graduate school, right?
Yes.
But so, you know, rather than, you know, I ended up finishing the degree, but rather than focusing too much on the technical aspect and the theory, what I did was go out to dance in milongas. And when a song got stuck in my head, I would post it to my blog. At first, I was always just, you know, chatting with tango songs about, you know, folks in the Bay Area, you know, other DJs, other teachers. And at one point, my friend, who I believe you've interviewed, actually, Felipe Martinez.
Yes, yes.
At one point, I was sitting with Felipe at the Monday Night Tango Practica at the Beat in Berkeley, California. And we're chatting about tango music. And he said to me, he said, "You seem to know a lot about this, actually." He's like, you know, and not a lot of people in the US do. He's like, "Why don't you, you know," I forget whether it was him or someone else who gave me the idea. In my mind, it's always Felipe. But, you know, he said to me, "You know, you should post these somewhere or put them online." And I was like, "Oh yeah, why don't I do that?" And so I started the blog that way. Actually, I was like, you know, I would literally, you know, when I was bored or needed a distraction from my readings, I would take the lyrics from Todo Tango, copy them into one side of a Word document, and on the other column, I would start writing out my translation line by line. And then I would go back and edit it, and then I would post it to my blog. You know, just kind of whatever I had heard in the milonga that night that was like really sticking with me.
Well, that's a very big practical contrast with the way things usually go at these universities. So yeah, that's Actually, I would really agree with that. Like, I've just seen the same thing in Latin American studies. Like, I've only done like a few extra courses when I was a history student, but
Mm-hmm.
I just
Mm-hmm.
noticed the same pattern that, like, it was very linguistics heavy in a way, um, and very theoretical. For example, I did a translation class, and they were very focused on exploring a lot of theories, like. Yeah, I mean, if you study political science, for example, you're pretty much doing the same thing. You're not going to be talking about U.S. politics all day. I mean, that's what people think as political science is. But I mean, I guess that's normal for academia, but not all of us are really that interested in doing that for a living. Or, and like you say, it's very brutal. Even like here in the Netherlands, like if you want to actually become like a pursue a PhD, there's so much competition, and like they have to work so much for such little pay, and if you don't agree, you're kind of kicked out of because you're too critical. So it's not a good work environment, and but still it's great if you find other ways to do this as a hobby, to just see it as a passion and not have to rely on it for a job. But anyway, that's getting a bit off topic, perhaps. But
No, I mean it really is something that I think about a lot these days, especially. I was lucky in the sense that the program I was in it wasn't a PhD program, it was a master's level program. And basically when I finished the degree, I got to pick professors from different areas to be on like a committee and do an oral exam with. That was actually the discouraged option, though. The option they really wanted was for you to do a research paper, because they expect, oh yeah, everyone who does this program is going to go on to another PhD program somewhere. But I was lucky in that I got to pick professors who focused on Argentina in the 20th century. So although a lot of it ended up not being practical, it gave me a broad context for understanding kind of the socio-political climate in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, that kind of surrounded the golden age of tango and the production of tango. So I did end up getting to take a couple classes that were interesting. History was one of them. Um, it was actually the literature ones that I found a little bit too theoretical. I like linguistics myself, so I like talking about phonemes and syntax and all of that. But it was more, when we're talking about like, how we apply like, psychoanalytic Lacanian criticism to these like avant-garde Argentinian films. I remember watching one film where it was literally just the camera was like watching a guy who lived in a hut on the Pampas, like a static, unbroken shot of him killing and eating an armadillo. And I was like, okay, this is supposed to be art. I'm sorry, I don't get it. And I don't really want to spend an hour and a half talking about this 45-minute clip of a guy killing and eating an armadillo. He kills and eats the armadillo because he has to. You know what I mean? Like that's it. That's not really like, it was something that I realized this just wasn't what I wanted to be doing with my life. I would rather be listening to tango music, going out dancing, and talking with people about tango lyrics. So I realized that what was happening, like the real life or living or interesting things in my life at that time, none of it was happening in the classroom in the university. It was all happening outside. It was all happening, in the bar at El Valenciano in San Francisco, at the Milonga on Tuesday nights, or at the Beat in Berkeley, or, in the discussions I would have on the blog with people who were offering me advice and corrections on how to translate certain things.
well, it seems like a typical tango lifestyle. Like it really just seems to consume everything.
It does. And at that time, it really, it did turn into something all consuming. I was lucky enough to be able to kind of take a year off from working and studying after I graduated from that program. And that's really when I spent a lot of time going to tango festivals around the US. I started to get asked to DJ kind of after Felipe let me DJ one Monday at the Beat. That was the very first time I ever did that. And that was kind of what launched my tango DJing career as well, and got me invited to all these festivals around the US, around the West Coast.
Yeah, I
And
guess. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
oh no, I was gonna, sorry, I was just gonna say, I did that for a really long time, like going heavily to tango festivals, at least like one a month, for a few years after that, probably from like 2010 to 2014 or so.
So actually, this might not be as chronological as planned, but now we're actually talking about this topic already. Like, has this this obsession has this always remained as strong as it? Because I'm sorry, but I see like a certain similarities between you and me, and in the sense of that you're way younger than most people are in tango, at least in Western Europe and Argentina, maybe not in Eastern Europe. I don't know about San Francisco, but I know a lot of places where we are kind of the exception, and we've gotten so. Sorry, are you still with me? Because
Yeah.
okay,
I'm
sorry.
still
Yeah,
here.
the sound was. It seemed like the background noise. That's like a little bit of noise that it dropped. So I was wondering, are you still with me? But yeah, I'd like this degree of obsession and wanting to find out everything about the topic, and then also maybe neglecting like your university and stuff a bit because it's less interesting than this great thing that you found that nobody else knows or cares about, and it's you like discovering something that's so particular, so specific. But yeah, it's but so that like, has it always remained the same with you, or have you gotten like more interested in other things in life or like something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it ebbs and flows really for me a lot now after, after that initial, for lack of a better term, honeymoon period, when you first start and you delve so deeply, and you're so immersed in it. And in my case, it was, I, to rewind a little bit, I dove headfirst in and was really obsessed because when I started in Buenos Aires, which is also the opposite of a lot of people. And I actually have not been back in the 15 years since I
Oh,
started either.
wow.
I know, but I'm planning on going back before 2026, so I can, I can sing along with Gardel in Volver. 20 años no es nada, is what he says. But 20 years turns into nothing. But and I was 19 years old. I was studying abroad. I decided to rent an apartment and live by myself rather than live with a host family or live with other students from my university, because I really wanted this like experience of being on my own in this big foreign city. And and tango was really the way that I connected with people too. Like I started taking tango classes at that time from a woman who I just found on Google, Lidia Ferrari. She lives in Italy now. But I started taking private lessons with her like every week, and then eventually going out to milongas and things like that. And that was like my whole social life in Argentina, getting immersed in that world. And then of course, coming back to the US, I sought it out wherever I could. At first I was still living in Tucson, Arizona, kind of a more smaller remote city in the desert, where there was a tango community. As you know, a lot of folks in that community were much, much older than I was. One of my best friends and a woman who I danced with a long time as a dance partner, Maya, she was 60 and I was 20 when we started dancing together. So she was 3 times my age. Now I'm gay, so I don't really care about that. It was never like about like any sort of social, sexual, emotional connection for me. Emotional, yes, social, but the erotic connection was never the point for me. Um, and then through graduate school, I went to San Francisco where the scene was bigger. There were more young people closer to my age in that community, and I think there still are. A lot of people who work in tech and have a lot of disposable time and income. But it started to ebb a little bit. I would say maybe a few years after, when I realized like when also the reality hit me of, okay, you have to have a job and you have to make money and pay your rent and pay all your bills. And I did not ever, I was always a little too much of a realist about my own dance skills, let us say, to think that I could become a tango teacher or performer. Because I'm sure the story you hear a lot and that works for a lot of people too is, they start tango, they become obsessed, they dive into it. And then within 2 or 3 years, they're teaching workshops.
So fast.
Yeah, they're trying to be on the circuit, and I
Okay.
think that appeals to a lot of people because, we want to, make a living doing this thing that we're passionate about, but that can also lead to a lot of burnout.
Yeah.
I remember talking to, in 10 years ago now in San Francisco, to my friends Nate Mello and Jennifer Bratt. They've taught a lot in Europe, and they were one of my favorite couples in the US for a long time. But by the time I met them in 2010, they had already been teaching and traveling for tango teaching for almost a decade. And I remember having a conversation with them one day at a restaurant, and they were just like, at that point, they were like, we're so bored and so burned out. And they had to go on and do other things, and kind of take a break from tango in order to rekindle or reignite the passion, I think. So I think for a lot of us who stick with it long term, that kind of ends up being what's happening. You realize that tango is a part of life and should let you enjoy a lot of your life a lot more. I don't know, but not become your whole life, if you want to kind of have a balanced outlook on things.
Yeah.
And and then there was just the reality of when I started having a full-time job, and having to get up and work 8 to 5 a lot of the times, or I had a job for a long time actually as a recruiter for my university, where I'd have to go to like night events and things like that, and it just kind of, it got in the way of tango. And it was almost like a forced hiatus at that point.
But I guess that can be healthy in a sense, because you're forced to take some distance, and then in the end, I'm just assuming things here, but it might help you not reconsider, but appreciate things that you have maybe lost because of too much immersion in this one thing.
Yes. I'm also always helped by the fact that, my partner, he doesn't dance tango at all, and is not interested in it. And we've always had a very healthy, like, separation between our life as a couple. We don't feel like we need to do everything together, but then our separate interests as well. But that always makes me keep a balance, being with someone. My partner and I have now been married for 7 years, and, together for almost 10. And, he works as a school teacher. He's training to actually be a counselor right now. But it's healthy because it forces me also to do things and take vacations, take holidays, and do activities that aren't tango and that are on a more normal schedule too. So I think that balance is really healthy. I found later on, sometimes I think when we're going to festivals all the time and staying up and dancing at the all-nighter between midnight and 6 a.m. with the sun coming up, throwing off our body's rhythm and our sleep schedule, people can slide into a little bit of unhealthy behavior sometimes.
Yes.
Especially in Europe and the US, where it's not as much a part of like your normal everyday neighborhood culture, and you might have to travel from your city to another city and stay in a hotel. In Buenos Aires, it's different because, people live at their house and they just, they go to the milonga around the corner, and, there's one or several every night, and you can just go when you feel like it and when you need it. And it isn't this whole thing that like you have to budget for and have a special travel plan for, and, make sure you have time to take off work for your holiday to fly wherever and do all of this. So
yeah, you're not really missing out on anything. If you're missing one milonga, then like nobody cares.
Exactly. Whereas I think in the US, I don't know if it's similar in Europe, but as you get connected to people like on social media, you see like, you have a lot of that FOMO, the fear of missing out, because you see, oh, all my friends are in New York or in San Francisco or on Capri or wherever they are at the hot festival. There's all these pictures of them having this great time. And you wonder, like, am I as serious about tango? Am I as dedicated to tango as all of my friends?
Well,
what am I missing out on?
That's the curse of social media. That's not just
tango.
Yeah,
exactly. But it's the curse of social media in general. But I think it sometimes can be amplified in a smaller community like this too, because it's not just like, you can't just tell yourself like, oh, those are celebrities, they have the money to do that, that's all fake. It's like, no, I actually know that person and I've danced with them and they're having a great time. Why am I not there? But anyway, that's also a digression. But
yes. Well, actually, I remember. Well, actually, I want to say two things at the same time, but let's just choose one. I remember Felipe and Ayano being very vocal about like never getting enough of tango. And I almost wanted to say I was a bit surprised, but actually I'm not sure, because it seems to be like I know so many people who are just like they've been doing this for decades and they're still super enthusiastic about whatever event they can go to. And like it seems like there's no escape button or something, like and it might not even like cost them as much distress as I would think it does if you're so addicted. Like for me, it doesn't feel like a very positive thing if you're then that's the other thing I wanted to say. Like last week I really danced for the first time in 3.5 years. Like I went somewhere and it was a good milonga in Amsterdam, and I danced quite a lot of tandas and the music was quite good, and like the package is okay. And then I noticed like I wanted to go to another salon, which was like later in the evening, because this was like a bit of a afternoon salon slash evening. And there was another event, and I just knew I was too tired, but I still wanted to go anyway. In the end I didn't, but like for days I just felt this whole sensation of like this embrace and the movement. I just almost felt it like burn in my body. And then I recognized something, like that's this huge what we were talking about earlier, like this tendency of people to become really almost consumed by tango as some kind of escapism. Like it's a very interesting thing.
It is, you know, and it's something, talking about lyrics, it's something that tango itself kind of warns us about a little bit, right? Um, there are all these lyrics. Now, there's, of course, like, you know, we can talk about the way that it's always the woman who's criticized for going out and dancing too much and drinking too much. That's one thing. But there are also songs about, the one that comes to mind is Bailarín Compadrito, about a guy who, you know, essentially that song is about a guy whose entire life and identity was wrapped up in being the coolest, hottest dancer at the milonga. And, you know, he looks at him in the end of the song, he looks at himself in the mirror. What is it? It says, un poco triste y viejo te ves en el espejo del viejo cabaret. You see yourself a little bit old and sad in the mirror of the cabaret, you know, in the mirror of the bar. And I think, you know, I started this when I was 19 years old. I'm 35 now. It's kind of one of those things where I'm like, you know, I'm taking that song more and more to heart as a warning, you know, about life and priorities, and what to do, you know, what to make of my life. But on the other hand, I understand people like, you know, Felipe and Ayano, who are friends of mine, who, you know, they make their living from tango too, and I understand the appeal and the attraction of that, you know, especially because for the last 10 or so years I've had to work at jobs that are not necessarily what I'm passionate about, or, you know, things that are very fulfilling to me, you know. And for one of the things I realized during the pandemic, though, in lockdown, when tango went away, is how much of a balance tango was offering me, in the sense of like, tango is something that I chose to do, that I chose to invest time in, that I chose to become knowledgeable about, and, you know, develop the skills to do, versus, and you know, and that feels good, and it felt good to be rewarded and recognized in that space too. Like, it feels good when you're DJing and everybody is dancing and having a great time and telling you how much they like the music. It feels good when folks like you from around the world tell me that they really like my blog and reading my tango translations. And that's not something that most people around the world have the luxury of getting at all, let alone from their job. So I understand the appeal and the, you know, the desire so many people have to marry those two things together, and to really invest themselves fully into it. But it's just, for me, it's not something that's totally healthy. I like it that, you know, that's one reason why I never taught tango. The other thing being, you know, perhaps a overly modest or realistic assessment, as I mentioned, of my own dance skills. But you know, is like, I always wanted it to be something that I could choose to do for fun, and that, maybe it's a hobby that pays for itself, right? Like, so I, eventually got to the point where I didn't go to any festivals unless I was DJing and I had my plane ticket and lodging paid for, so that I wasn't putting, I had the luxury of getting to the point where I wasn't putting any money into tango. It was a break even proposition for me, I didn't expect to make money from it, but it was nice to be able to go on a holiday and do this thing that I love and not actually have money come out of my pocket. And, a nice escape from kind of, especially here in the United States, how we're famously workaholics and a little bit exploited too. We work like 9 to 5 and beyond, for meager wages, and you have to like stress yourself out and do all of that for your job, and there's like, except for very few, there's very little reward. So in that sense, tango was a nice balance for me, where it was a space where I could be recognized and I could be rewarded, but also where everyone is just going to have a good time.
Yes, yes. And yet at the same time, you also value that you actually don't depend on it that much for financial security, or
Exactly.
it's a very wise way of looking at it. And some people might not need this attitude because it just works for them to do it as a living. But it's interesting to know what you said about these two dancers. I don't name Melo. I don't remember the
Jennifer Brad.
Okay, yeah. That like already back then you heard something like, we've been doing this for 10 years and we're so burned out. Well, that's I guess that's a problem with any profession or activity, that at some point you just feels like you're going through the motions. And they often say like, find something that you're passionate about and make it your job. But I guess in reality it doesn't often work that way, because once something becomes professional and stressful and an obligation, then the fire might just go out. So
Yeah. And I think it was wise of them to take a break. They're both still involved in tango now, and they're both still dancers and teachers that I really admire. I actually just saw both of them. I was lucky enough to get to travel and go to New York for a weekend a month or so ago, and I saw both of them, and we chatted and we had a good time. But notably, neither of them went to the milonga I went to after.
okay.
I had
Okay.
dinner at Nay's Brownstone with Nay and Jennifer and their kids afterwards, and then I was like, "Are you guys going to the milonga?" And they said, "No, we're good. You go have fun." And I went, and I did. I had some fun. That was my first milonga I had been to in a really long time, back in August in New York. So, but yeah, it's interesting. I think the people who are able to stick with tango long term are able to find a balance. Either they go all in and they have a lot of success, and they have that temperament, or they eventually find a balance between other aspects of life, whether that's being a parent or being into fitness, or whatever it is. They find a balance between that and tango, and they kind of let tango inform and support that, rather than being the only thing that they do and that they are involved in.
Yes. Anyway, let's focus a bit on your first trip to Buenos Aires, because you've already summarized it quite well, I think.
Yeah.
But it's still quite a special story, in a sense that you found something you were interested in, passionate about, perhaps already, even though you were not dancing tango yet, but you decided you wanted to go to Buenos Aires, get your own apartment, stay there, and then you told me that all your whole social life just it was all about tango and nothing else. And it's a very interesting story to hear, because frankly I haven't heard it this that much, like this level of dedication is, even though there are a lot of people really passionate about dancing tango, but what you did with your blog, for example, like there are not a lot of people who have that level of input, and so yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm being a bit fake here, but maybe tell me something more about like your first impressions of Buenos Aires, or of when you saw Milonga, or your first dance class, like
Oh
perhaps
yeah.
a few anecdotes or something. It would be very interesting.
Yeah, well, the exchange program I was on through my university, of course, they did this usual thing of welcoming foreign students in the beginning, tour around the city. We hit up all the touristy spots. They took us on a bus down Avenida 9 de Julio, past the Obelisco, past the Casa Rosada, all that stuff. And I remember the first time I saw tango in Buenos Aires was um, a show at Cafe Tortoni, right, with stage dancers. And of course, I enjoyed it. It was fun. But because I had already previously taken this class back at my university in the US, and I knew that there was a little bit more to it than just what you see, in shows for tourists. Um, I sought out, as I mentioned, like I kind of just, when I sat down in my apartment, I Googled tango lessons Buenos Aires, and one of the first hits that came up was this woman Lidia Ferrari, who was teaching just like it was a 20-minute walk away from the apartment I was living in, and of course exchange rate was very much in my favor at that time. So I was like, oh, I'm lucky enough I can afford to take a private lesson with her every week. And so I was like, okay, I want to get down to this. I want to work with someone who's not famous, who is promoting social dancing and going to the milongas. And so I forget what day of the week it was, but every week, once a week, I would go to these classes. I would walk over to the house. It was one of these kind of classic old Buenos Aires houses with the patio in Palermo. And also Lidia, my teacher, she was very Argentinian. She was a tango teacher by night, but a psychoanalyst by day, which could not be more stereotypically Argentinian.
Okay, can you just explain why, but for the
yeah, well,
viewers?
Argentina is famous for being a country where especially in Buenos Aires anyway, where people are very into psychoanalysis and therapy, and everyone has a therapist or a psychiatrist that they see all the time, kind of like New York, right? It's just this famous stereotype that Argentinians are very into psychoanalysis. But so I went to these tango classes, and at first it was really just the basics, like walking, hearing the beat, and then embrace, like walking to the cross. We started with the fundamentals. And I remember that was a really good touchstone for me, because I had, for the first few weeks, I had kind of almost been regretting my decision to go and to live in an apartment by myself. It was kind of far from the university. And I had to take, like the bus or the subte to get to the university, like a 40-minute ride, which was fine. I grew up in Chicago, and I went to a high school where I also had to take the train when I was a teenager. So at that time, that was fresh in my memory when I was 19 years old. And I was like, well, I can do this. I can do a commute in the city. And I kind of wanted to do that. But it did get very isolating in the beginning. And there were a lot of times where I kind of regretted that decision. As like, I should have lived with a family. I should have lived with people. It can be very lonely being on your own in a foreign city where you don't really know anyone. None of my friends from, from my undergraduate college in the US went on this trip. And I wanted to go by myself, kind of to push myself, right, outside my comfort zone. But I remember one of the first times that tango really hit me or connected with me, it was a few weeks in to that lesson. And my teacher, Lidia, at that time, she used the same CD for all our lessons, right? So that I would get used to hearing the same songs.
Yeah.
And it was a Caló CD, Al Compás del Corazón, one of those Reliquias CDs. I don't know if people know those, but if you everyone has probably seen them, with like the yellow cover and the black and white picture of the band leader on it and the text in cursive. And I remember, there was a day where I had felt particularly lonely. Like, I had like tried to like email or instant message my friends. At that time, nobody was Skyping really. In 2006, we didn't all have webcams, certainly no Zoom. But, none of I hadn't talked to any of my friends back home in the US for, a couple of days. I was feeling very lonely, very isolated. And then I hear this song come on, and I actually start listening to the words because I already spoke Spanish at that point. And it hit me that what the song was describing was exactly kind of what I was feeling. And it was, ironically, the song was Lejos de Buenos Aires, but there's the part where he sings, what is it? Con la mueca del pesar, viejo triste sin valor. What's the part I'm thinking about? Lejos de la gran ciudad que me ha visto florecer, en las calles más extrañas, siento el alma oscurecer. So far from the big city where I flourished or where I grew up, in the strangest streets, I feel my soul begin to darken. And I was like, that's how I feel right now. Like I'm alone in this city halfway across the world. And I realized though that's kind of when I realized that like there's something deeper going on here with tango than just the dance. You know what I mean? Like there's also this other dimension and this melancholy and this kind of, well, in a way that this art that talks to us across time about universal shared human experiences too. And then when I did more research and delved deeper, I realized, when Raul Berón recorded that song with Calo, he was not much older, or was the same age I was then too. He was like 17, 18 or 19 when he recorded that song. So that was one of the first times that I really like connected with tango on a deeper level.
And maybe it saved your stay in a way. Like it might have helped you decide that or at least like get this new sense of why am I here? Like because you knew like this is always stuff the mind does to you. You go there and you have this idea and it's actually a great idea, but then when things aren't always going as well, or maybe not as well as planned as you wanted to, then you kind of start getting these thoughts and these doubts, and it's actually very destructive. Or maybe in some cases people actually decide to go back home and they're happy about it, but you had such a specific mission in a way that and even that mission for me is very related to this melancholy or the nostalgia that you see in Buenos Aires in this culture, in the tango. That's like maybe it wasn't a coincidence that you felt like that, and then it could like touch you on a deeper level. So,
yeah. Well, exactly. It's the, I realized that a lot of the songs, they're singing about being young and isolated and lonely sometimes, or, not just the lost love, but because Argentina, like so many New World, like all of the New World countries, is populated by immigrants from somewhere else, who are always longing for this other place, right? And in a way, ironically, even though it was abbreviated version and for like 6 months, and I wasn't really immigrating, I was just on a study abroad program, but I had this feeling of, being dislocated, being far from my home and my family. But then I realized that that's what a lot of that music was talking about, which is why I really connected with it and was able to kind of go deeper, delve deeper into the music, into the culture.
And that's where you grow.
Yeah, exactly.
So this experiment turned out to be life-changing in a way, or enriching, giving you purpose, destiny.
Yeah. Well, maybe, perhaps. I don't know about destiny, but it did make, it connected me. I think just, but by all the circumstances that surrounded my trip or my visit to Argentina, it connected me with a lot of the emotions that are like kind of form one of the core currents of tango in a way that I hadn't expected, I think. But that there was a lot of synergy there. That's when I started being really interested, not just in the dance, the music, but in the lyrics and what people are actually saying in the songs and the stories that they're telling in the songs.
So you were not interested in that previously?
No, I was interested more in the dance and the physicality of it, when I started off, and in the social culture.
Okay.
Back in that undergraduate class I took with that professor, one of the things she showed us was like, you know, like a clip of like people dancing a quote unquote tango in a Hollywood movie, right? But then contrast that with like an actual clip of like milongueros or clips from, you know, slightly more authentic from like Tango Argentino, you know, those shows where old milongueros, even though they were dancing for the stage, you know, were dancing in a way that was rooted more in Argentinian traditions, you know, than in, you know, Hollywood stereotypes. I was more interested in the dance, the physicality, and then just, you know, all that culture of like going to the milonga, dancing with strangers, cabeceo, you know, not having to have a partner, you know, all of that. Um, than I was in the music and in the lyrics until that moment when I had that connection and that light bulb kind of went off. When I was a kid and a teenager, I did a lot of martial arts that kind of connect
Oh,
with my
really?
Filipino heritage. Yeah, that was my dad's way of connecting me with my Filipino heritage because he grew up in the U.S. Was doing Filipino martial arts, you know, eskrima,
Cool.
stick fighting. So that physicality was very interesting to me, and the physicality of tango. You know, it's improvised partner dance. It's almost the opposite of like a duel or a fight in martial arts in a way. Like you have to be really close with this other person and moving in a way that's harmonious and pleasurable rather than in a way that's designed to, you know, knock them down and hurt them. But there is that common thread, that link of you have to be really aware of the other person's body, where they are, really aware of your body in specific, very efficient ways to move. And so I think, you know, reflecting on it now from back then, I think that's what attracted me to tango first. When I saw the clips of the more authentic or real tango, um, you know, was, you know, the really interesting physicality and how not only the couple, but the whole room moves together. So it started off with that for me, but then, you know, it very quickly, when I got to Argentina, became about like the story, the lyrics too.
Yeah, there was already this fertile ground for going into that direction because you were already interested in social tango. And what I just thought is like it's so special how you've been telling us today how you were immediately interested in tango as a social dance, because I think a lot of people just have like not just this Hollywood idea but also the more stage tango idea, like that they were they came across tango that way, and maybe not just in Hollywood movies but maybe also in TV adverts or whatever. But you were, yeah, you were, maybe I used the word destiny because like it sounds a bit, maybe a bit pretentious or something, but it like you really had this clear path in front of you, even you didn't fully realize what it would be.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so you in Buenos Aires, so you at some point I guess you started going to milongas, and then you said that you built up this whole network of friends who were not related to your university at all, your exchange program, but all to tango. So how did that happen?
Well, that was through my teacher, through Lilia. You know, eventually, you know, after like a month or two of lessons, she was like, "Now you know that the point of taking all these lessons is so that you can go to a milonga and dance. Have you been to a milonga to dance yet?" And actually, I hadn't. I was kind of too afraid at that point. You know, I was like, oh, my skills are not, you know, up to snuff. And again, I think that's sometimes the opposite of how people come across it here or start in the US or outside of Argentina. You know, a friend takes them to a tango, you know, to a milonga or something, and they're like, oh, I want to do that, I want to dance. And people start dancing at the milonga, you know, right away, basically. And I didn't have that experience at first. You know, I was taking all these classes, and eventually my teacher was like, you have to start going to the milonga because, you know, I can only teach you so much here. You have to actually
Ah,
like go out and do it in the crowd and with someone who is not me, and like, you know, like so that, you know, you're actually leading and improvising. And um yeah, I don't know that I wouldn't say I got really close to anyone on the milonga scene there, you know, because I was there, you know, in such a temporary way and I was still starting off my journey. But I did start going out to milongas a lot and seeing the same people and having the same people who I would dance with. You know, a lot of foreign expats, of course, because at the time, you know, my Spanish was still, I was still really polishing it. You know, my conversational Spanish. Um, but I remember going to My first milonga I went to, my teacher encouraged me. I forget what day of the week it was, but it was one of the more low key, less touristy ones in Salon Canning, on a weeknight. And I remember I went and I was terrified because the floor was so crowded and, everyone was dancing so close in close embrace. I had only done a little bit of that with my teacher. We would do walking in the embrace, but she would, teach me the figures in a more open embrace. And I was like, oh God, I really have to like now dance the whole thing really close. And there's going to be all these people that I have to not bump into, or, I'll be shunned and kicked out. But there was just something like really so fascinating about it and so addictive about it. Like when you like look across the room at a person and connect with them and do the cabeceo, and then you get up and you just, you're going right in, you're going to hug and you're going to dance. But I remember the first one of the early ones I went to, there was an Argentinian woman I danced with. I don't remember her name or anything. She was of course older than me because I was 19 and everybody was older than me. But I remember she had like giraffe print leggings on and like neon green shoes. This was like the first days of Comme il faut. And, I remember after the first song of the tanda, she looked at me and we're doing the chamujo in between. And what she said was, "That didn't go very well, did it?" And I was like, also as an American, like a little shocked at like someone just being so candid in their assessment. Like we're usually like famed here too for being too nice and too complimentary and not wanting to hurt people's feelings. But I kind of liked that. Like, I liked that she was so candid. I was like, "Oh, do you want to like stop?" And she's like, no, we have to finish the tanda. She's like, "It wasn't that bad." So like we kept going and kept dancing. And I kind of pushed through my initial shock of like, "Oh God, do you want to quit? Was it that bad?" And I ended up feeling like, okay, well, I finished that tanda out with her. Looking back, I have no idea whether she was a good dancer even or not, but I felt very accomplished in that moment. And that was, I think, where the initial kind of addiction or honeymoon period took hold. Is like, I just was like, okay, now I have to like capture this feeling again and again. And like, there's new other people to dance with and other milongas to go to. And that was like about halfway through my stay there. So, I ended up, going out almost every night for a long period, a few months into my stay there.
Oh, you learn fast that way, I guess.
Yeah. I think doing that and having that experience is really what polishes you too, like getting out there and dancing in an actual social environment rather than just taking classes all the time too.
Yes. And especially if you've been conscious of this, of what real tango actually is, like from the beginning. Like, of course, you're a terrible dancer if you just start, and it's really hard for a man to get through this initial period of knowing that you're absolutely incapable of pretty much anything. But that's I guess all leaders, not just men, of course, but all leaders can relate to. Well, I guess for women who've started following and then learned to lead later, it might be a bit different. But for us, it's pretty tough, especially like a lot of young guys. I think like who come to tango, like that. Well, maybe just guys in general, like they don't really have that much experience with dancing, so they feel even worse in that sense. Like they have like these ideas about themselves, like I'm never going to be able to dance because I cannot learn it because I'm made of wood, and all these silly things we say to each other, not to each other but to ourselves, and to each other, I guess, as well. So that's that can be a bit difficult, but well, I'm very glad you persisted because
I also think I did have that advantage of having done martial arts, from the time I was 10 to 18 too, and that was still very fresh in my body, because even more so than like playing a team sport, I would say it gives you not only awareness of your own body and physicality, but of where another person's body is in relation to yours, a little bit sooner. There's a couple younger men I know who came to tango younger, who acquired skills really fast, who have a background in martial arts. the one who comes to mind is Dominic Bridge. He was very active and lived in Europe for a while, and he taught with like Sigrid van Tilburg and a lot of like these like big European festival dancers. He's actually from the US, from Oregon, where I live. And he's a little bit younger than me, I think. But he, I think, has a martial arts background too. He did martial arts as a teenager. So I think having just some sort of physical activity that you do before you come to tango, I think also tends to let people persist with it more, because there's also, you know, I've heard this anecdotally from a lot of Argentinian tango teachers, you know, that they like to teach in Asia, for example, because students are so focused and dedicated and respectful. And that's something that, you know, comes from martial arts culture too. For me, it's like, you know, not having this attitude of like, I know better, or I should be able to do advanced moves right away, but knowing that like there's going to be a learning period. There's going to be a period where your skills are not up to snuff and you need to build them in order to do more advanced things. That's something that in the US, at least, I don't see a lot in our culture. You know, people want it all, they want it now, and they want to pay. They think that by paying enough money,
gun shows.
Well, and they think that like just by accumulating this list of really famous dancers whose class they have been in, that's going to somehow give them the skill. You know, not just ganchos, but this idea of like, you know, the customer is always right and I'm the customer and I'm paying, so you should teach me what I want. Or you know, I noticed this a lot, and this was when I went on one of my lull periods. I noticed this a lot in like US tango workshops. Like people would go to a workshop, but then they would push back on the teacher and they would be like, well, that isn't how so and so taught me to do it. Well, I've taken lessons with these famous people and they say to step this way or that way. And it's like, okay, well, then why are you in this other person's class?
Yeah.
If you don't want to learn what they have to offer you and don't want to be respectful about it. But I think that, you know, that more rigid and respectful culture and just kind of knowing your place when you're a beginner. I was already kind of acclimated to that for martial arts. So that's why I was able to persist and push through, where, you know, I don't want to speak for Europeans, but where a lot of, I think, men in the US especially have this attitude of like, if I just pay someone enough, if I just pay for the best, then that will make me the best, you know? You know, like I have taken so many advanced classes with so many people that I should be entitled to do this, or how dare you tell me I'm doing this wrong? It's a bit
of humility goes a long way, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. It definitely does.
So I guess we could talk about that for a long time, I guess, but there are many of these topics that I would love to talk more about Buenos Aires as well, but I think it's important to, in the remaining time, that we talk a bit more about tango translation, about like I guess a lot of people also want to perhaps hear something about your vision on how to translate, especially considering that you've had like this official education in linguistics and poetry and literature and whatever. Like I know for like I hope people realize that translation is horribly difficult. And I'm not sure if you agree, but that's what I think. And I've noticed in that translation class that like it's so yeah, like I already said, it's complicated. It's also it requires so much. For example, in poetry, like even for the language itself, like you already have to know so many nuances in a language to really see that's also what I've seen going wrong in a lot of like translations by other people who might have not, you know, spoken Spanish so well or understood the Spanish so well, is that they're missing certain nuances. And I think like, they're trying to say something completely different, even though literally it seems like, but that's also poetry. That could also happen in English, for example, or in Dutch or whatever language. But yeah, I would love to hear some more about because you've already said a few things about how it came to be, like why you started with it, because of your friend, and that you wanted to write down these translations instead of working on theory for your classes. Like maybe if you can just we have another 10 minutes or so.
Oh yeah.
If you maybe, yeah, I would love to hear a bit more about that aspect of your life, of your career.
Yeah. Well, part of that background is I always, from the time I was very young, I wanted to be a writer, a novelist, something I'm working on now,
Okay.
adjunct to my career too. But I was always fascinated by language, by words. I grew up, in a household where both my parents spoke English, but my grandmother, who was from the Philippines, she spoke Tagalog, of course, and Spanish, as I mentioned. And so after that story, after connecting with the lyrics a lot in Buenos Aires, when I got back to the US and started dancing a lot in tango communities here, I realized that a lot of people had no idea what any of the songs were about and spoke almost no Spanish at all, right? And
Yes.
you know on one level, like, that's okay, because it shows how powerful the music and the dance is on its own, that people can really connect with it and really want to participate in that culture without even knowing what the songs are about or speaking the language that they're in. So that's good, but it's also, at some point I was like, okay, but this is only going to deepen understanding if more people who don't speak Spanish can understand a little bit about what the songs are talking about, where they came from, what the life and culture was like for people around the time when tango was really developing or incubating, especially during the golden age. um, and so the original process that I would do is, as I said, I would just get a Word document out, make 2 columns, paste the lyrics from Todo Tango. I would also listen to them a lot, because a lot of the lyrics as they are written is not what the singer ends up
Yeah.
singing in the
Yeah.
version that we hear for dancing. Um, so I would listen to the song on repeat as I was reading through, correcting the lyrics I got from Todo Tango, for example. And then on the other side, I would have my English version. And what I started off doing in the beginning was I would go line by line, and I would, do a kind of line by line, like translate that line, translate that line. So I had it all side by side. And of course, that way of translating it, right, is just a rough draft, because this, even in two languages that are actually as related as English and Spanish, both are Indo-European, and English has a lot of Latin vocabulary, historically. So there's a lot of cognates and false cognates, like words that look similar, sound similar, between the two languages, but syntactically they're very different. So, right, that line by line doesn't always work, or it produces something in English that is very stilted.
Yeah.
And so then at one point, like, I would do that, maybe step away from that one for a day or two, and then I would go back and I would like almost like cover up the Spanish side, and then just look at it and read it in English and be like, okay, now if I was a copy editor or a writer writing this text in English, how would I edit this so that it sounds better and makes a little more sense with just the words that are there, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe choosing a synonym then in English of the word that I originally translated that sounds a little better in the context, either for sound, for literal, like, euphony, musical sound, poetic sound, or because it captures the nuance a little better. And so I would go through and I would edit that way. And then I would put it on the blog with the Spanish below it, so people could still read the original Spanish, and with the song there then, so that they could sing, so that they could read along with the English as they were listening to it and recognizing, like, oh, I've danced to this song at my local milonga like 1,000 times. So that's how I originally started doing it and started translating, and quickly you realize, too, that you have to, sometimes not only look up certain words, especially when a song is heavy in lunfardo, right, or specific Argentine slang. But you have to think sometimes about the context, or what they're describing, or historical events that might be surrounding this song. A good example of that one is like Puente Alsina, when they talk about, like, how the old bridge was taken down and the new one was built, things like that. some songs are very universal in tango, and the ones that can connect with us, like my original story, no matter where we're from. But some are so specific and tell things that are such certain stories about like Buenos Aires or neighborhoods in Buenos Aires that you really need to do some research and do some background to understand the broader context of the story that song is telling.
Yes.
And if you look on my blog, there are generally going to be fewer of those. Not because they're fewer in tango, but because those are the ones that are hardest to translate, and that you have to I have to have the most footnotes, because my goal was always to like have a text that someone who is just a native English speaker or a good English as a second language speaker who doesn't speak any Spanish can read and understand the story that the song is telling. And but then sometimes I was discovering like, okay, there are certain songs where you need a lot of footnotes, because otherwise, like somebody is not going to get what that word means or what that phrase or what that reference is just in passing. I think the one that I have that is most heavily footnoted is Cambalache, Santos Discepolo.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of how I approached the translation and the process I worked through for all the songs. At one point, about, I want to say 5 to 6 years in, I actually went back. At that point, I only had like 50 or 60 translations. I think I have more than 100 now on the website. But I went back to the ones from the very beginning and kind of almost redid the process. Like I looked at them and I looked at how they looked and sounded in English, and I did a little bit more editing to kind of bring them more in line with like what my current sensibility was at the time. Because the other thing about translation is that it's never static, right? Like language is always changing. The language that we speak is always changing. And your own relationship to language and phrasing is always changing too as a translator. And, maybe you want to emphasize a certain nuance, because it's never an exact one-to-one proposition. It's not like decoding something, as we know.
Yeah. So I guess that you were really doing something that didn't exist yet, because I know there was well, you had like this Tango and Chaos sites with a few translation. I don't know if you remember that. But you also had
yes.
Yeah, and you also had
Alberto Paz.
Yeah, but those translations were not like you were a native speaker of English, so
yes.
I guess you just had way more like a sense of, yeah. I mean, I don't want to criticize anyone, but I guess you were just doing something that didn't exist yet, and well, I guess that was well, at least I hope for you that it was like really popular, because I feel like we're still, if we're translating, we're still doing this niche thing. Like we have an audience, but it's not nearly as big as the tango audience in general. Like if you post a picture of a cat in a close embrace, I mean, you're gonna get a million likes. But if you post a translation, there are gonna be likes. But so I'm wondering how was the reception, or like maybe I'm assuming a bit too much, but it's an interesting thing.
The reception was really positive in the beginning, but there are always people, at least in the U.S., who surprise me by saying like, I still occasionally run across people who are like, oh, the songs, like they have this general notion of, oh, the songs are too sad. I don't really care what they're saying. I just listen to the music. And I'm always like, okay, that's a choice that you've made. But in general, the reception has been overwhelmingly positive. And I think that as, outside of Argentina, in the US and in Europe, we're reaching like, which I think we reached this point, like, maybe 5 or so years ago, the like peak tango point, where we're so saturated with a festival almost every weekend that you can go to. All the biggest Argentinian teachers who are, both old milongueros and the latest couple who won the Mundial are going to be on a little circuit somewhere around you, and you can go see them. I think people were wanting to, I think I came along at the right time too, right? Because there was more interest in tango. It was just starting to explode, I remember, like in 2006 in the US when I started, there were like a few select events like once a month, and they were ones that everyone in the entire US went to. Everybody went to the Portland Tango Fest in Valentango, in like 2000 to 2008. Everybody went to Denver over Labor Day weekend in September. There were these big events where people from all the coasts still went and mixed together. And tango was just taking off. And I think the community, at least in the US, was just reaching that level of maturity where people were starting to be interested in, I guess, what are the more esoteric aspects of tango? Like, what are these songs actually saying? Who wrote them? Who's in this band that's playing? What are the orchestras? Where there began to be more of an interest in that amongst lay dancers, let us say, people who weren't necessarily DJs or teachers. So I think I kind of came along at the right time when there was an appetite for that, an appetite to like know more about the broader, deeper, more historical aspects of the dance that we were all obsessed with. And especially, in the first few years when I was coming directly from Argentina, and that experience was fresher, and it was still, as you say, the unique story of I didn't start here and then go and then make my pilgrimage down there. I started down there and then came back here. Of course, now I've danced far more time outside Argentina than I ever spent there, as we kind of discussed before. But yeah, I think I came along at the exact right time too. I think that the kind of zeitgeist was ready for it. People were ready to delve more and to know more about the culture and about the lyrics, especially. So it was well received, and like I said, a couple years after I started the blog, like folks would start asking me to come and as part of the festival on the weekend, give a talk about tango lyrics. I did that for Felipe and Ayano at San Francisco Tango Marathon one year. I did that at Portland Valentango one year. I think also because people were wanting to start, festivals in the US at least were wanting to start offering something a little bit different too than just, okay, here's Molinete class, here's Milonga class, here's Valse class, go to those classes and then, shower, nap, and then come down and dance at the Milonga. People were wanting to, as the events started to boom and people wanted to have something unique to attract people.
Yeah.
I was there at the right time too, to like be invited to like lecture and to talk about these topics. So I was kind of, maybe you're right, it was destiny. I kind of like, started doing that all at the exact right time.
Wow. So yeah, it's always so painful if you feel like you can spend 3 more hours talking about this stuff. But I guess we should call it a night or a day in your case, because we've already past the 1 hour mark by more than 10 minutes now. So I guess that's enough for this time. But well, maybe I'll see you again on the show at some point. Who knows? But in any case, it was really great to. That in a sense, like I did not only hear your story, but I also had like a discussion in a way. Like it was also a talk. And you, for some reason, you also involved me more than I usually would let myself be involved, because I think it really has to be about the person I'm interviewing. But I just saw these like these very interesting parallels between you and me. Like, for example, I also I started to dance in Holland, but only for a few months. Then I immediately went to Buenos Aires for a few months, and there I just saw what it really was like. And I did not really have all the knowledge that you had from your studies, but it was very interesting. And I just spent all the years like after that just wanting to move to Buenos Aires and all these crazy things. But in the end, I couldn't. But yeah, it's and you're also young, like I said, like there are not a lot of people like us, I guess. So it's yeah. It's really great if you have kind of synergy with someone.
Yeah.
So it was great to meet you. And
likewise, Lucas. Yeah, it was. Thank you for being persistent again and for connecting with me. And I'm glad we were able to do it. And I would love to come back and continue our conversation at some point too.
Yes. Well, great. Well, have a nice day there over there in America, and
You as well. Get a good night's rest.
yes,
Back in
yes,
Europe.
yes, yes, yeah. Still a very awkward thing, but
Yeah.
well, see you again, hopefully. Bye.
All right. Take care. Ciao.